Testing 1 2 3.
Testing 1 2 3. Testing 1 2 3.
Hey everybody, my name's Aaron LeBeau, and I am a developer advocate at Couchbase, and I'm going to do so, well, my name's Aaron LeBeau, and I am a developer advocate at Couchbase, and I'm going to do so, well, I accidentally have some volume up on my testing of the stream, so that's not good, so fix that real quick. Sorry, I have an iPad here running the test volumes and stuff. So today I'm going to be testing out Visual Studio 22 for the Mac. It's pretty great. It's a pretty cool editor, and I'm going to build some web pages and stuff with it. But first, let's real quickly updating my database server for Couchbase's latest version 7.01. So I'm just going to call this mini dev01 administrator. I'll use the really secure password. This is on my local machine, so don't ever set your password to password, but for just development, that's fine. Now let's see here. We'll accept the terms, and we're going to, that's a lot of memory. Let's do 2048. For index 512, that seems right. I think you can't go to Learning Lord 1024 on that. That seems fine. Vetting. Sure, the rest of these look pretty good. I'm setting up a Couchbase cluster, by the way, just to a single node. And actually, I'm doing this with just the installer on the, because I'm running a Mac Mini, and that has got an M1 processor in it. It's really great, but the disadvantage to that is that Docker, when you run Docker images, you can run x86 images on it, but it's kind of slow, and there's some crap with it. So it's not cool. So because of that, I'm just going to run this straight from the Mac version, and by doing that, it's a little bit easier for me. So you can just they actually make a version that you just download to your programs, and you can run it just like any other program on your Mac. And that's what I'm going to do for right now. I'm not going to save my password. That seems silly. And then for buckets, let's go ahead. I'm just going to add a bucket. A bucket's like a database. And so that's where we can store some documents. Couchbase is a document-based server. And so we're going to build an ASP.NET application. And that's going to be an API, REST API. And it's going to talk to this and store some information in it. So we're going to call this gems. And we'll just say it's a Couchbase. I'm not going to get into like some of the things that these other things mean today. 4096, 4096. Oh, I only have 4 in total. Let's do 2048 then. That should be fine. There are some advanced settings, but once again, I'm just going to go with the basics here. It doesn't take very long to build a bucket, and so now I can go into scopes and collections. I'm going to build a new scope probably eventually. Scopes can give you all kinds of crazy options like multi-tenant and stuff. For right now, I'm just going to do the standard scope. That seems like a good idea. So let's go here and see. I think that's enough for Couchbase to get set up right now. Let's go into ASP.NET and take a look what we got going on there. And so let's move over to ASP.NET. So I streamed on Wednesday and then kind of deleted stream. I had some audio problems and just didn't seem great. And but I'm gonna hopefully solve that today by showing you what I did, and hopefully the audio is fine. So if you're in chat and you think the audio sucks, let me know, and I'll do my best to try to fix it. And that will be great. Let's see here. Oh, let's see. Waiting for the chat to refresh. I don't see anybody complaining about audio. I'm gonna make some. I'm just going to assume that it's working then. And I did test on my iPad before I got on, and it seemed like it was fine. But if you can't hear, let me know. All right, let's see here. So on Wednesday when I streamed last, I did set up some stuff, and I do want to review that real quick so that you don't feel like you're lost in the middle of nowhere. So this is Visual Studio for Mac 2022. It's a preview build, and it's got the new bits for .NET 6, which is pretty cool. And so I was crazy enough to just go in and go to new project and I started a new ASP.NET project. So you can do that too if you want. It's not hard. You just go into the file, new project. You go into, I went into apps, and I picked the API, and then I clicked continue, and then it asked me for what version of .NET, and I selected 6, and then I said, sure, I want these 2 things, and then I hit continue. It asked me for a location. I saved it, and this is how I got this project. Now, most ASP.NET projects come with just the weather forecast object here, this class, and then it also comes with this weather forecast controller. And you'll get like a program.cs. And it's kind of bare bones these days, which, I mean, that's good and bad, I guess. In some sense, bare bones is cool, but then in another sense, it's not cool. So, it's flexible. Let's just put it that way, right? You're going to be able to kind of do whatever you want with that flexibility, and that's not a bad thing per se. So what I did was in programs here, I added some NuGets. Let's go take a look. So NuGets, if you're new to ASP.NET, are packages. They're like packages. And, you know, if you're on Node, you'd use the Node Package Manager. If you're on Swift, you'd use like CocoaPods, or you'd use, I can't remember the one that starts with a C, or you use Swift Package Manager. Over in Android and Java and Kotlin, we have Maven. And I like Maven a lot. But we're in .NET, and that uses NuGet. So we can right-click and go to Manage NuGet Packages, and it brings up this really cool window that allows you to manage your NuGet packages. Now, one of the things in Visual Studio 2022 is that it's more native now. So they're rebuilding it from the ground up to be native. So a lot of the UI is changing over to native components, and it's really nice. I've been using Visual Studio 2022 since before it was called that, and before it was called the previous name, which was Xamarin Studios. It was originally called a product called MonoDevelop. And I started using it in about 2011. I was looking at building mobile applications, and I found out that I was a big Object-C fan and building there. But when I got to Android at the time, did not really want to dive into the Android Java platform. It only used Eclipse, and I really hated Eclipse at the time. And that was because I got cut with it in a long time ago in a project, JBoss project. And so it really just had this not great flavor in my mouth for Eclipse. So I found out that Xamarin was being created, and this product was a thing that you could build mobile applications for both iOS and Android. And basically you could write it in C#. So you only have to write the code once in C#, and then based on that, it would work on both platforms. So I downloaded MonoDevelop. It was really expensive at the time. I think they cost like $2,500 for both iOS and Android support. So I started using it back then, and I learned Xamarin. And so I'm wearing a Xamarin t-shirt here from one of their conferences, I think in 2014 or 2015. I don't lose track of years nowadays. But so I do native development. I can do Cocoa, and I can also do Swift. And I've done native Android development and Java and Kotlin. And I really prefer Kotlin. But I also can do Xamarin. Now, today I'm not going to do Xamarin. I'm just going to kind of play around with ASP.NET, building an API, and then I'll probably throw a mobile app on it. So NuGet, in summary, is basically this package manager, and all the platforms have a package manager of some sorts. Now, for NuGet, the things that I care about the most was I want this thing called Swashbuckler, and it's got this thing called Swagger, and Swagger is pretty awesome. With a very small amount of code, it will document your APIs for you, and it will build ways that when you run the application, you can test your APIs. And Aaron likes that a lot because he's lazy. Now, I know you're going to say, well, there's Fiddler and there's Postman and there's all these other tools to test your APIs. That's great. And if you're using those, I have no problem with that. But with this setup in Swagger, the theory is that it ships with your application, which means you don't, like in Postman, a lot of times you have to give somebody a JSON file that tells them the structure of your API. And that's how they can then test it. And that's not fun. And you can buy a Postman account, and you can share these API definitions. But this is free, and it's pretty great, to tell you the truth. I like Swagger a lot. And so I'm going to configure that instead. And since it's free and it's pretty great, and honestly, if you're building APIs in Java or Python, I've done it in Python, I've done it in Java. You can set up Swagger with almost any way you build APIs, and it's just going to work, which is also pretty awesome. So I've got Newtonstone, Jason, and the Newtonstone, this is a person, actually. He, James, I want to say is his first name. Yes, James Newton King. He is a developer at Microsoft. He built this framework a long time ago, and it's become like a semi-standard. .NET does ship with the JSON serializer, but the Newtonsoft is really good. It's got some features that the .NET one doesn't necessarily have, and it's just, I like the syntax, and I know it works. It's one of those things where I know, and Jacob, of my buddy, if you're watching, Jacob, I know that the .NET one can be faster, but I also have the comfort level of just knowing that I've used Newtonsoft for years, and I know it works. I know there's very little glitches in it, and the syntax is sugar, so I'm going to use it because that's what I'm comfortable using today. So what did I do to make this work? How did I get Swagger working? I'm going to just show you that. And believe it or not, it's only a couple lines of code. So one, I had to add this line of code in. Now the builder in ASP.NET, if you've never done it before, is what builds your web application. Builds it so that the server can answer API requests. And you can see here that we just start the builder and also in .NET 6, this has changed. And if you were to go look at ASP.NET 5 project, this would look a lot different. It'd be two different classes. It would be a startup.cs class, and then you also have like a program.cs class. And then here, there's no class. It's just a single file called program.cs, and there's no class it creates. There's no namespace. It's kind of like Express. If you're doing Node with Express, very similar. So all you do is you make a builder. Now, the builder, you can add services. And you can see this line right here adds in all of our ASP.NET controllers. And ASP.NET, with its REST interface, is a lot like MVC as a pattern, model controller viewer, right? And so the theory would be is that you have a model, the controller sends out the model so that the view can see it. Very similar to that pattern. And so we have controllers. And we add those controllers, and that allows us to then send information to the web browser based on what people request in. So we can see here that we're going through and we're using the builder to add controllers, but we want to also add in this really cool Swagger. So you can see here, builder services, add Swagger gen. What this does is this generates the actual Swagger file. If you go read about Swagger, you'll find out that there's usually a JSON file that you have to configure with the API. Well, this will auto-generate that JSON file. So that's what this line does right here. Now, once we do that, we want to build our app. This is actually going to make it so that we can take the controllers, we can take all this stuff and actually present something to the users. So you can see here, I've got, I should change this comment. This is going to be configure Swagger for the HTTP pipeline, because that's what it really does. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to tell the app, hey, let's use Swagger. That seems like a good idea. And then we could do some custom configuration in the UIs of the Swagger web interface. And I would like to do that. Now, this in C# is something called a Lambda expression. And in all languages pretty much have Lambda these days. I think C# was probably one of the first there, though, a long time ago. Like even in .NET 3, they added link support. And link is like this query syntax that is Lambda-based. It's pretty cool. So all we're doing is we're saying, hey, let's call this and let's send in this C variable that we can use inside this Lambda. There's two things I want to do. I want to configure an endpoint, and this will be a URL that you can go to in order to see the Swagger. And I'm saying that my configuration is going to say swagger/v1 swagger.json, and if you were to go to that, we should get some magic displayed. Now, that's a lot to type in, right? I mean, I'm lazy. I don't like to type. And I know most developers don't like to type also. And so because of that, there's something I could do. I can cheat. And I'm going to do cheating, and that's what the next line does. When I do c.route prefix equals string.empty, what this does is this says if you go to the website and you don't put anything after the host name and port, and I'll show you that in a second, then just show Swagger there. And that's pretty cool because, once again, as the lazy developer, I want the ability to do this without having to do a lot of work. And this allows me to do that. And so that's pretty cool. And then the rest of this is just stock configuration. Use HPS. You should probably use an HPS. That means secure, SSL/TLS, transport layer security. And use authorization would mean if I configure this to require what we call tokens. And the tokens, usually I like to use are something called OAuth. And I probably won't do that today, but in the future, so we will definitely be going through and set up OAuth authentication. And there's a couple different places you could do that. There's actually, most people don't know this. This is kind of cool. If you want to learn OAuth, there's two major providers out there that in enterprise are really popular. One is Microsoft. They have something called Azure Active Directory. And I do know the developers on that team. I know one of the PMs on the team and a couple other people. And I've actually worked on it for years, using it in my mobile apps and in also in APIs. And I have worked with the developers that actually write the client libraries for it before. And there's a couple friends I have. Jenny is one. I don't know. I don't think Jenny ever watches, but if you are, you're super awesome. She is one of the smartest developers I've met, and we have troubleshooted some problems in the past. And I had a lot of fun and figured out some issues that they had in their mobile client, and went through and figured out how Microsoft could make a fix for us at the previous company I worked for. So a lot of respect for that team. But also Auth0. They're another company out there, and they also offer free authentication. Now, of course, both Azure Active Directory and Auth0, the free account that they offer, it's going to be limited to how many users you can authenticate per day, because these companies need to make money, and that's the true of everything, right? So that is something to be known. But if you're learning or you're just trying to build something, being able to just go around and play with these services, and the fact that they are offering free versions is super awesome. And it makes sense for them, right? Because if they make free versions, it gets developers understanding how to use those tools, and then companies that build software can then use those services. And so if you're looking to add something onto your resume, we will definitely be doing some stuff. I also know some people at Auth0. And so because of that, we could probably I can maybe even talk to some of them about having something going on with that, and maybe have somebody join me on the stream to do some configuration. Done it before. It's another great product. So we have multiple ways we can do authentication. We might actually do a stream with both, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's go back to the code here. And so we have app.map controllers. And what that does is maps the controllers to what we call something called routes. And so routes are basically, if you go to your web browser, you have the address bar. And in that address bar, you have, websitename.com or whatever that is, right? And then you're going to have a slash, and then everything after the slash is a route. That's the place that you want to go on that website. And that's really important for us because we want to map that to something that makes sense. Now, for some people, they'll have something like, if you look at that Swagger line up there, they may have something like API/v1/ and then whatever controller name that you're going to use. And so maybe this is user profile, and then slash, and then maybe an ID of a user that you're looking for. Now that's a route when it comes down to it, and we can configure those in our controllers, and we can kind of have the pathing in both ASP.NET and pretty much any platform you're building to have custom routes to do anything you want. And then, of course, the last thing we do is we tell the website to run, and that's kind of important. So I'm on a Mac writing .NET, which is Microsoft technology code, and it works great. The truth is that ASP.NET is really fast. Kestrel, which is the web server it runs on, has really been optimized for Linux, and probably one of the fastest web servers out there now. In fact, in raw performance, for raw performance, if you're looking at it just from a pure content standpoint of serving static web pages, I think it's like in 5th place right now for the fastest web server. And they have some statistics out there, and it may even be higher than that. It may be 3rd place. I haven't looked at them in quite a while, but Microsoft does spend a lot of money making sure that Kestrel is really efficient. It runs really great in Kubernetes, and I like it a lot. I think that, obviously, if you're doing Node and you're using like Nginx or something, or Apache or something like that, that's fine too. Those are great products. Use what you know. I'm not saying that you should switch over to this even. I'm just saying that I know this really well, and I was kind of curious of the Visual Studio 2022 bits, and I wanted to see what was inside of it. And the way I usually test things is I just build something with it. And so that's why we're checking this out today. The last thing we're going to do is we're going to tell the app to run, and that tells the API to run. Let's go through and check this out and see what happens. This did work last time I checked, and so I'm making the assumption it still does. That was on Wednesday night, and I have not changed it any bit, so by theory that should be there. Let's go ahead and I do have it set for Edge, so it's going to actually build. Now, it does take a few seconds to build. We can go through the build output and see that. Now, and this is a beta, so beta usually means slow. I mean, a lot of times, like if I'm building beta software, I have a lot of debug statements in and that kind of stuff, and so that usually will slow things down a little bit. I would love to make the console bigger for you, but there's a bug because it's a beta, and if I change the font, it crashes Visual Studio for the Mac. So whatever you do, do not go into preferences right now, and do not go into here and change these different font sizes, because Wednesday's stream, that caused all kinds of chaos, and that's the reason why I kind of deleted this stream, because I spent more time figuring out this bug and found the bug report with Microsoft than actually showing off and writing code. And that's not what I'm trying to do on this stream. So this font, I apologize if you can't read it. The one thing I will say that you should probably do if you're a developer and you're trying to figure out things is that under the build option, there's a log verbosity, okay? And you want to change this to be as high or as close to the sun as you can get without it having too much information. As a developer, I need as detailed logs as I can get if something's broken to try to figure out how to fix it. Now, the diagnostic, that's usually getting really close to the sun, so close that you're probably going to burn yourself. That's a analogy to Icarus, who is a Greek story, I want to say, about the kid that had wings and flew too close to the sun, and his wings melted off because they're held with tar. But I'm just saying, normally it comes to normal. I'd like to go to detailed. And that gives me, I believe, enough if I have a problem, there's going to be a stack trace. I can look at the stack trace. I can have a pretty good idea of where something's broken and then hopefully fix it. So that's just my only suggestion out of there that I would change if I was a developer. I'm looking at this. Now, of course, I incidentally changed the font size, but we can zoom that in if we need to. Let's see here. You can use the Alt key on your keyboard, and if you're on a trackpad, you can move your fingers up and down for scrolling. I've got a Logitech mouse here, so I'm just going to use that wheel to scroll up and down, and I can change the size of the font so you guys can all read it. Now, it looks like it did load up an Edge, and you can see here, here's my API that I wrote. Now, that seems pretty interesting. It just gives me a bunch of JSON data, and now I could put this into a mobile app, and I can then display it off, and that'd be pretty cool. Or I could build a website with React or something like that to do that. I'm going to take the URL off, though, because remember I was telling you I want Swagger, and I want to show you that to start with. This is like my quintessential starting point to build any APIs. I want the ability to test my APIs very quickly. Okay, you can see here I've got a user profile that I did not show you, and this is a new path, so this is a new route. And you can see here it takes something called a profile ID, it seems, and then it will show up a profile. Let's go through and try that out. And I'm just going to put in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I know that this is a mock right now. It doesn't do anything. But I'm going to just type in any kind of number there whatsoever and execute. And when that happens, I get data back. This is the power of Swagger. I could try my API out. I could put in stuff into it, and it will show me the results back, which is pretty great. I can't say how much I think that's pretty cool. So you can see here, this one is just returning a profile ID back, which is not the thing I typed in because it's a mock. And it's got a first name and last name and email address. And you can see here that the web server that's running on is Kestrel, and that's because I'm on the Mac. You can run Kestrel on the Windows also. Some people run IS Express, I think it's called. I haven't done Windows in quite a while, so I don't know if it still does that or not. And I do have a Windows machine, but today I won't be doing it on there, and I don't predict I'll be doing anything on Windows unless somebody really wants to see it on Windows. I am primarily a developer that runs on a Mac because I do a lot of iOS development, and I don't, you can't easily write Swift code on the Mac. And so because of that, I prefer using a Mac because I can run all the platforms on my Mac. So we've got an API here that doesn't really do anything. And then also we've got this other API that really just came with the product. And you can test this too, though. You can see here I've got this weather forecast, and I can say try out. I can click execute, and it will show me. Now, if you're new to like API development stuff, you're saying, what's this curl thing? It's actually pretty cool. Let me go back to user profile, and let's go ahead and grab this right here. What you can do is you can test all this from the command line. So if you're a command line nerd like me, let me bring my command line up here. Make this a little bit smaller so everybody can kind of see it. There's my command line. Let's do it clear. We're in the wrong application here, Aaron. Let's go to ~developer / what is this called? This is called gem space. Clear. All right. I can just type this curl command in, and what it does is it will call the API, and it will give me back whatever the response is. And you can see here, it brought back the JSON data. So this is just another way that you can test your API. Curl is really great if you want to script some things. You know, if you're trying to pull data down from a web service and script some stuff, you can do that on your Mac using something called a shell script. And so I use curl a lot for that. It's pretty great. You can also send stuff to the server. So, I mean, it's pretty versatile in its ability to do things. We're going to get rid of the command line window there. So now that we've seen that this works pretty good, we've got Swagger up and running and stuff, we can start taking a look at our code. Now, I'm going to start going through and setting this up like I would a real project. Okay? And for that, if I look at my controller to start out with, let me get this user profile control open again. You can see here that the route says just controller. And so what it does now is it's going to say anything that is doesn't have the word controller in it, that's going to be the name of my route. Okay. So it's going to take the word controller out of it, and then my route will become user profile. So if I were to name this user profile details, then my API I'd have to go to would be /user profile details, because it knows the name of the class and it uses that in the route name. That's something unique to ASP.NET. I'm pretty sure some other platforms can do that, but I really do like how it does its routing automatically with this. And you can actually set up a bunch of, these are called attributes in ASP.NET, and you can set up actually in .NET, you can set up a bunch of different attributes to tell the controllers to do different things, which is also pretty cool if you ask me. Really, really kind of popular. So let's see here. I'm going to go in, and one thing I want to do is just probably want to take a look at it. So I'm trying to think here, like through my mind, what would I want to do well, let's start out with, I showed you Swagger. And so since I like Swagger a lot, one thing I can do is I can show you that you can actually take your methods here and you can add some details into those that will show up in Swagger that can help your developer some information to start with, okay? And that's usually pretty interesting. Now, the get method I have here is actually kind of wrong in many ways, because the get method is not taking the user profile ID from the path, and that's how REST is supposed to work. Now, what does that mean? And that's something that if you've never done REST before, I do want to show you. And this is getting into like the nerdisms of like the standards of how people want their APIs to work. So when we executed it, let's take a look at what it did. This is the line that it went to. Okay, see this request URL? That's where it went to in order to get my API back. But this is wrong, because if you look here, we have a question mark, and then we have a variable name named user profile ID, and we're passing in a string value, and then that's how the controller is processing it. But really, that's not how the API should work. How the API should work is the following. We should be able to just say this. That should be the route to that particular user record. So if I'm looking for a user profile for user 123456, and that's the identifier that I'm saying makes that user unique, I should be able to go to that, but it doesn't work. Nothing happens because of that. I do not have my ASP.NET set up right. So this is my fault. My controller set up wrong. So let's go through and let's fix that to start out with. Let's start out with some core basic things. If we're going to do an API, let's do the API right. And I think that will get us started. And then I'm going to probably add in a something called MediatR, because it allows me to do something called CQRS, Command Query Response Service. And I think that's what it stands for. CQRS is a pattern and very popular in ASP.NET. It makes it so our controllers are no longer fat. It basically makes it where we can send messages to a command. We can take a command. Well, I'll show you as I write the code, because if I just try to explain it and not have any code to explain it, that's probably pretty dumb, right? But the theory would be is that sometimes we build up in our controller something called a fat controller, where we have all our code in the controller. It makes it really hard to test with unit tests. And so because of that, we want to break our code down in a way that we can test it easier. That's got to be one of the things we're doing when we're building anything. Even when I'm building an application for myself, I want to be able to test it. And if I can't test it, then my problem is if I go away for a week and I come back to work on it, I can't remember how it works. And if I change code, I don't remember how to fix it because I just don't remember the code. And when you're working on a bunch of different projects, like I work on a lot of different things, unit tests are the things that save me. And I know that some developers hate writing unit tests. Get used to it. They're really great. And I know that they are time consuming and stuff, but they really do. They save my bacon all the time. So that's what I want to do to start out with. I think I want to go through and fix this. So let's make this awesome. That seems like a good idea, right? Let's make our API look pretty cool. So to start out with this get person, we need to go through and make some changes, modifications to the attribute, we call it. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to get an ID in, and it's going to be of type GUID, we're calling it, okay? And we can also set another property inside of this. So this is kind of like a function call. And I'm going to say I want a name also. And I'm going to call this name user profile. And this just makes it get by ID. What the name attribute does is, or should do, is make it so that we know that this is unique. And as long as the red squiggly line doesn't come up, my syntax was right, and I think we're good. And so the IntelliSense, it's called, it kind of tells you whether or not you're writing your code right or not. And so far this seems like it's doing it right. So let's go through here, and I don't always remember the syntax, so we may have to go look at some API documentation. So there should be something called Swagger operation, and it should be a function. Now my guess is I need to make a import to this. And so in .NET, we use a using. In some other platforms, we use the word import. It's different for each platform, but this allows us to bring in a library of code that we can kind of use. Now, if I remember right, and it's been a while, let's try using swashbuckle.asp.core.annotate. I don't see the annotations library. That does bother me a little bit. Swagger, no annotations. I think the problem is going to be is I need to add another NuGet library in for annotations. Let's go ahead and try this. Quick actions and refactoring. See whether or not I can figure out that. So it doesn't know about it. All right. So I believe that there's a library called annotations, and I must not have the NuGet package. So let's look at that. See if we can find it. I'm going to go to NuGet, manage NuGet packages, and see if I can find the ASP.NET annotation one. So I'm going to say swashbuckle, and let's try, we don't want installed, we want browse. So I'm going to switch our tab over here, and I'm going to say annotations and see if we have, there we are. So swashbuckle, ASP.NET, core annotations. And I want 6.2 because that's the current version I'm using. I know you can't see that, but I do know that. So I'm going to grab 6.2's version here. And if we go look, we'll see that we're running 6.2 here. And the window that it does that tells you what it's doing is down here in the lower left version of the newer version of Visual Studio. So if you're trying to figure out like what it's doing, you can see it here. There is another window called the package console. And the package console will give you the details of everything it does with packages. And so I know that text's not easy to see. I apologize. And that's because of the fact that the font size thing doesn't work. But you'll see here that I do now have ASP.NET Core annotations in here. And now the hope is when we go back to my controller, I should be able to add that namespace in and be able to use it. So I'm going to just kind of minimize our window there to get us more code to be able to read. I'm going to right click and see whether or not it can automatically add the using statement for me. So you can see here, generate class, generate class, generate class. See, none of those is right. So let's go to the top and see if we can just do a using. Using swashbuckle.ASP.NET Core. And I still don't see annotations. That's a big old bummer. Let's try to do something real quick here. Just see if we build, whether or not it will build with the annotations class and see if we can use those. If not, we'll just move on and I'll have to try to figure out why annotations don't work for our APIs. They're not a end of the world, but they really are kind of nice. And so why would I build? See right here, this is what it's saying I'm missing a reference. So the build won't work. But if I tell it to quick action refactor, what I should do, and this is a beta, so you can see here that the window that to do the suggestions is running really slow. If I right click and say quick actions refactor, boy, it just does not want to keep up. So I don't want to generate a new class. What I want to do is I want it to have it to use, find the namespace for it. And I just don't see that as an option in our refactoring. But on top of that, one of the problems is I don't see the ability to use the DOL that we just added using swashbuckle.esp.net core. I see Swagger. I see nothing else. If we go grocery shopping for generate, we have nothing else. And if we go UI, probably nothing else. So even though I added the annotation library, for some reason, it's not seeing it. Let's go back to ASP.NET Core, make sure that we do have it. I do have it. And it says, I don't know, it says it's there. And so I should be able to use this namespace and get to it. But I can't for some reason. And, yep. Well, let's do one thing real quick, just to see whether or not this fixes it, and then we're going to move on. I'm going to close this out and reopen it and see whether or not reopening Visual Studio work. This is the equivalent of rebooting, right? If you reboot and it still doesn't work, then obviously you're wasting time. And so let's just try it one more time. Swashbuckle ASP.NET Core, and I still don't see annotations. So we're not going to do swashbuckle annotations today, and we'll have to do it in the next stream once I figure out what's going on. I don't want to waste a huge amount of time trying to figure this out, so we'll just take this out. It does not stop us from building an API, it turns out. So when we build an API, the thing that we're going to have is we have this thing called a user profile. That's what we're trying to get. Most of the time, this would be something called async. And so inside of .NET, we would build something called a async wait. And the keyword for this is called async, and we return something called a task. And so since we know that we eventually are going to get this from the database, and that takes time, I am going to make this async. And I'm going to say that it's a task that returns a user profile. Now, of course, this is going to get mad at me because I'm using these keywords, and I probably don't have references to them. Did it automatically add the references? That would be great. Let's take a look here. It did. There's system thread tasking, and so I have now the namespace for that. Now, see here, get is going to be broken. It's put a squiggly line, and the reason why it's doing that is because my nowhere in my code do I tell it that I have async code, and I need to fix that. But the other thing is get should be reserved to only getting things that don't take something in. At least in the way I syntax this is I would write it something similar to how I write Swift or Kotlin, where I'd say, what am I doing? I'm getting it by an ID. And then the ID would be the profile that's passed in. Now, this is what we were talking about earlier. We would like this to be part of the route, not part of the question mark, right? So if we go back to that original syntax we were talking about, when I was talking about this, right now, we're doing it right here. We're getting this as part of what they call the query string. I don't want it to be in the query string. I want it to be in my route. I want it to be just in the slash. So I want to say localhost, my port that I'm running on, / user profile, / and then whatever ID I have. That's how I want this to work. Well, how I do this is simply some changing to, I'm going to put an annotation in my code to fix that. So in here, the keyword or the annotation we want to do is something called route. What we're going to say is that we're going to get the ID from the route instead of from the query string. And believe it or not, that's it. That's the only change we should have to make. Now, let's see here. Specify, there's no argument given to response to template for route string, show potential fixes. What? Oh, this might be something, it is from route. Okay, never mind. So I wrote route and the ID told me, no, Aaron, you're wrong. It's from route, not route. Okay. And so then I told it to fix it, and it fixed it for me. Don't remember syntax? Hey, there you go. Awesome. So let's see here. We know that we're going to take an ID of GUID, and we know that from here, from our HTTP. And so the only change we'll make here is we want to make it a GUID, we call it. This should now match this up here. Okay. And we're just giving it a variable name so that we can use it down here. In fact, we're going to do this. We're just going to return whatever you pass us. So I'm going to say user profile ID to string. We'll pass that back to the user. And right now to test our API. Now, the other thing that's going to be a problem is that we told it that we wanted to be async. And so in order to emulate this, we probably need to make some fake async stuff happen. So what we can do is we can just say something called task.run. Let's say the syntax for this is this. And then I should be able to take all this code and put it in here. And we're going to fake out until we get some real async code running. And we can say await task.run. And then we can just say return inside of here. And what's it saying about here? Let's see here. Not all code paths return. Oh, otherwise, we can just say that should work. Why is it mad that say, oh, well, I'm missing my semicolon there. That's not a good thing. It's too used to writing languages that don't have semicolons. Why is it saying that there is not all code paths return? Is it because it says that there is a option that the task.run does not return it? I'm guessing. I bet you anything if I just said return. It'd probably get mad because it wants a task user profile. User profile. That probably will work. So it's basically saying if something happens with the task, run that instead. I honestly don't think that that's needed. I think that's actually kind of crap. Let's just leave it like this. This should work. And this ain't gonna last very long. We're just trying to test to make sure that our route worked. And then we'll start talking about like how to build a real controller. Something that is more real-like syntax. Let's see here. No, it won't let me without returning that. Very interesting here. Let's just do that instead. I could probably also just fake out the task run by doing nothing but sleep and then just return the user profile. And that would probably be another way to do this to basically satisfy the... Actually, I remember now. I could just go in and do a completed task. I could just tell it to... Yeah, I think I could do that. That's probably a better way to do this. So let's go through and refresh this now. Our Swagger. Because we need to refresh because we changed the signature. Now, look. The signature is totally different. Now it tells us... Hey, you need to give us an ID. See that? This get changed. And if we take a look at it, now it's asking for two things. So unfortunately, now it's asking for ID and user profile ID. So I still don't have the syntax right. Let's go back and take a look at that real quick here. I think I need to change this to say ID. So that it matches up here. I believe that's what I'm doing wrong. Just looking to see, is there anything else I'm doing wrong here? That seems like it'd be it. Let's go ahead and hit stop and hit play again. We're telling it we want to get, what does it say? Oh, yeah, I renamed it, so I need to refactor it there. I am calling it lowercase ID, so that's fine. Let's try building again and see what happens now. This is why when you start faking things out, it gets a little bit tricky. Let's take a look now and see whether or not it does it right. So if I go back into not weather forecast user profile, now it's asking us for a single ID. There we go. Just need to match it. So for this, I usually like to just go to GUID generator, and there's a website. I think this is the one. Yep. I'm just gonna have it generate me a bunch of GUIDs. And that way I can reuse these. So I'm going to just cut this one out. Bing. Forgot to tell I just use Chrome or use Google instead. I'm going to paste this one in. That's a real GUID. And then I'm going to tell it to execute. And we should see as now as our curl has changed. Our curl has changed to be the host name, port, the name of our controller, and then this GUID. And now when we look at it, we are coming back with the basically the new one. So the task that runs not working. So that was the fear. And I just accidentally opened Android Studio instead of going back to Visual Studio for Mac. So let's just do this. And let's actually not do it that way. Let's just do this. And we could even tell it something like sleep, task.sleep. Is it sleep? Now I'm thinking that it's delay, I think. Yeah. Let's delay for 200 milliseconds. We'll put a delay in that makes it look like we're calling the database. In other platforms, it's called sleep. I never remember how to emulate this, but this would be like a mock, right? And so in here, we're just going to say, pretend that a database call happened and we talked to a server. So let's delay this for 200 milliseconds. And then let's return this user ID. Now this should work. I'm going to go ahead and save that and try to build again. And now we should get John's profile back. And then we'll start taking a look at like how do we tear this thing apart and make a real API. So there we go. That's just the weather one because that's what it defaults to. I'm going to go to the refresh option here. Go into here, try out, go grab a new GUID. That's all like this website that generates GUIDs. Makes it really easy for me to do this kind of stuff. So if we take a look here, now we should get back John's profile with the GUID that we sent in. So we know that the route sending in works and the route coming back works. Awesome sauce. Let's see where we want to go next. So let's go ahead and close this out. Close this out, close this out. We got too many windows open. Let's go back to the Visual Studio and stop our debugger. Let's go to our solution here and take a look. So right now we have everything on one big project. We have a folder called controllers, and then everything else is just sitting in the root. Now this is not, technically speaking, how most people would build an ASP.NET project if you're doing enterprise development. Usually the project structure is going to be a little bit different. So this is called, for those new, it's called a solution. And inside of the solution, we have multiple projects. And every platform I know of that I've programmed in has this analogy where you can have multiple, you have something like this big workspace, and I think in Xcode it's called workspace. And then when you kind of drill down, you basically can have little projects inside of it that you can borrow code from. And why do you do this? What is the point of this? Well, most of the time, it comes down to code share. If I want to share my code with other projects, I need to take that code out and put it into some place that I can reshare it. Now in ASP.NET, the most common reason I've ever done this is for either one or two reasons. And there probably are more, but I'm just going to say the two most common ones I've done recently. If I change my models, the things the data that I'm dealing with and sending back and forth, we call those models. And so I have two right now. I have a user profile. You can see that this is right here, a model. And so this is just a class that has some fields in it. If you think about it for a second, I'm sending this back via HTTP to the browser, and then I'm looking for some kind of client to reuse it. There's a couple of different types of clients that can reuse this, but one of them could be a Xamarin mobile application. Well, if the person was receiving this JSON data, they'd have to receive it as a string, as JSON string, and then deserialize it back into one of those type of objects. But if they didn't have that type of object definition, they would have to build that in their project. That's a waste. That's a waste for them to say that they have to completely build the same user profile object and have that in their mobile application. We're duplicating code at that point in time. If we know that this is what we're returning, then if I shared this with that project, that mobile project, by theory, we could use the same code. Now you can't do that. And that's the first reason that I would separate this code out into a separate, what we call project. And I'd probably build that into something called a NuGet package. And then I can basically tell the mobile app and my web app to use that same NuGet package. If I change the model in one, I'm changing it in both. That's pretty cool. That's the first reason. The second reason is if I have microservices and I have models for whatever reason that are shared between multiple microservices. And technically speaking, microservices are like a silo of information. And so most of the time this doesn't happen, but it's not always guaranteed to work that way. I'll give you an example of like where that kind of breaks. Role-based security, RBAC, something called role-based authorization control. If you have RBAC and all your microservices are using the same RBAC model, well then of course you would probably have some kind of class, some kind of model defined that everything could reuse. Well, in that case, you wouldn't build it 4 times. You would build it the C# class once, and then you tell all the microservices to use that. So there may be a shared microservices that all your microservices use, something like a RBAC. And in that world, you'd probably want to separate that code out. Here's two really good examples of why you want to separate your code out for code reuse inside of ASP.NET. Now, how to do that is we can just build a new project, it's called. So how you do that in ASP.NET and Visual Studio for the Mac is pretty easy. You have to make sure you have the top thing selected inside of the navigation window we have over here, and this is called your solution. When you right-click on it, you want to click Add a New Project. And it's going to just ask what kind of project you want to add. Well, we don't need an API project. This is just going to be a bunch of classes. So there's something called a library, and that's what we want to do. We want to build a .NET class library. Now, standard, I want to say this would make it .NET Standard 2 point whatever, and there used to be something called core versus standard. We're going to go with just class library, okay? Because this is a .NET 6 based application. I want to say class library is going to hopefully make this .NET Core, and we're going to be good. Yep, so you can see here what I did. So that's good. I did select that. So when we go back here to take a look just real quick, you want to definitely select class library. And when it asks us for the .NET target version, since our ASP.NET project's .NET 6, we want to make this also .NET 6. Finally, it's just going to ask us for a name for this. And we're just going to call this gems base so that it matches our naming convention that we have here. So this is gems base dot I'm going to call this domain. And this is where we're going to keep our domain objects, basically. And this is a kind of paradigm of describing our different types of things. And so there's domain-driven design and domain-driven development. And so we're going to say this is where our domain objects live. And that's what our models really are. I'm not going to go hugely into the driven design today. Just note that it's out there. Definitely something that if you've never used before, you should probably read up on it. It's very popular these days. I'm going to delete class 1. Class 1 has no class. Let's delete that. So why is this complaining here? No, must contain non-values when exiting constructor. Consider. No, we will not make those nullable. We'll make the assumption these are serializable. So in languages like Kotlin, I could just put data class in here, and this would be so much easier. I think in C# 10 that does support like the data class option, if I remember right, or there's some kind of syntax similar to it. I haven't looked it up yet. I have honestly not been doing a lot of .NET development lately. Been doing a lot of Kotlin and Swift. So this was an excuse to get back to doing some .NET to make sure that I wasn't getting rusty. So I'm going to take these two classes, just move them over to this project. Well, I'm going to delete weather forecast because we don't need it anymore. And so let's delete that, and then let's just go ahead and delete weather forecast. Let's go look at weather forecast controller. Is there something that's telling that this is the first one? That's the only thing I was worried about. I don't see it, so let's just delete it. So one thing that's happened is I moved this object over, but the namespace stayed the same. So we want to change that namespace to be domain so that it matches our project name. Now, normally you could refactor this. There's an option ID to refactor. I was having some issues with that cross-project, so I just kind of dragged and renamed it manually. But no, I'm sure when this ships that will probably be fixed. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. But now here's the problem. Even though I put my file over here and then I told it to use the proper namespace, my controller no longer works. It says, I have no idea where this user profile thing is. What are you talking about, Aaron? And if I even right click to try to tell it to fix by telling it to refactor, there's no options for it. So why is this happening, Aaron? What is going on with the universe? Well, I can explain this. It's something called dependencies. Because of the fact that we have this in our project, this project in our workspace, this project does not know about this project until you tell it about it. And that's something, a dependency we call it. So what does workspace or what does solutions do? Sorry, I'm thinking of Xcode here. What do solutions really do when it comes down to it? To tell you the truth, they really are telling MS Build what order to build your application. What is MS Build? MS Build is, think of it, it's not the compiler, but think of it like the program that goes through and orchestrates the compiling of your application. It's like the make tool. And if you're using our languages like C or C++, you probably have heard of make. We do have Gradle over in the Android land that MS Build is very similar. in many ways. So, and if you're looking for an analogy, you're pretty close to having that analogy if you were to say MS Build is that. So what MS Build does is looks at the solution and say how many projects are inside of it. I'm going to build each one of these projects, then whatever listed there. And you actually go edit the solution file, and you can see that these projects have something called a GUID inside of them. I'm gonna spare you from all that horror detail. Just explain to you how I'm gonna fix this. I'm gonna go into dependencies. I'm gonna go to add project reference, because we've added a new project and we need to make a reference to it. So what's going to happen is our new window is going to open up. Now this is really cool. This is a brand new window in version 22, Visual Studio for Mac 2022, and this is a native window. I was going to tell you earlier that some of the windows were based on an older framework called GDK Sharp, which is really popular on Linux. The GNU toolkit, I want to say GNU, yeah, GNOME. Sorry, that's the UI for Linux, because originally, if you go back to early in the stream, I was telling you, Visual Studio for the Mac was based on Xamarin Studio. Xamarin Studio was based on a product called MonoDevelop. And MonoDevelop back in 2011 ran on Linux, it ran on Windows, and it ran on Mac. And so because they were making it for 3 different platforms, they needed a UI framework that they could run on all 3 platforms. And so they had the GNU toolkit ported to C#, and then made it so they could run on all 3 platforms. So there's a lot of legacy, though there's some legacy left, of moving that over from being this GDK Sharp to being the native Cocoa, we call that AppKit Windows. And the advantage to that is that they're faster, they're obviously easier to program, and they don't have to maintenance a separate library. So this is all native Mac UI, which is pretty cool. And you can see here we have all kinds of options here. We have a little tab control. This is totally Cocoa. You could definitely tell this, and so it gives you even the really nice 2 windows selects. If you've done any Cocoa development with AppKit, you definitely recognize this kind of UI. This is very similar to Apple's UIs. I'd say the only difference would be is that Apple's UI, if you were to look at it, anytime I built these, I almost put this reference would be over on the left, and these packages would be on the right. And if you go to any kind of preferences of the Apple's apps, they almost always do that. They almost always have the selector on the left with the results on the right, and then usually they'll have a plus and minus key down here, not a remove button. They'd have a minus button to allow you to remove that entry. That, I could tell you from just doing years of AppKit development, is the pattern that is really popular in iOS. And I'm trying to think here, do I have a native app I could show that off in? Can't think of one off the top of my head, and I don't want to waste any time doing that. But just note that if you look at the HID and some of Apple's apps, how they write them, you'll see that that pattern's a little bit more popular. I may even tell Jordan over at Microsoft that they may want to look at the HID on this particular screen. But either way, I'm going to add that project reference in. And now what you're going to see is that this user is no longer going to be read, because I can now make a reference to it. And I can just right click, go to quick actions and refactoring, and it should be able to eventually see that class. Oh, it restored. Let's see if now it can see it. Show potential fixes. Show potential fixes. There we are. See, now that it went through and restored the packages and got the reference in, now it says, would you like to use this class that you have in gemsbase.domain? And yes, I would. I would like to use that class. And so now what's happened is it's add the reference up here to it. And now I can use this user profile object down here for my API. And that's the only thing I've done. And this should make it so that it's puppies, kittens, and rainbows. I'm going to delete the rest of these, by the way, because I don't think they're being used. I'm going to go ahead and debug to make sure that I didn't break anything, because we did do a pretty big thing here. We added another project to our application, and we basically want to make sure that we don't break the universe by doing this. And if we look here, it looks like the build is working. And if this will take a few seconds, but then once this happens, we should be able to see there was no build errors, which means that technically speaking, this should be running. And Edge is opening up a new window. I don't know why I would be doing that, but you can see here that our build results look pretty good. Looks like Edge opened another window. So somewhere in the configuration, it still thinks weather forecast exists. But you can see here now it does not. Let's go ahead and try it ourselves again. Where did my window? I lost my window for for GUID generator. Let's go GUID generator. Real quick, get our free online GUID generator. Let's generate 1,000 GUIDs. And let's go ahead and put that into Swagger. And now what should happen is we've refactored that out and we're closer to having something that is a little bit more likely of a real project. Perfect. So by doing that, we've got our Swaggers, we've got our 2 projects now instead of 1 set up, and we're kind of cooking with fire here with gas on Visual Studio for the Mac. We're able to basically make 2 projects inside of our little setup here. All right, let's see here. So with that, boy, I think I want to get out of the world of doing fakes and get into, well, we shouldn't get out of the world of fakes because we need testable stuff. But we need ability to kind of break this out so that all the business logic's not being done inside of our controller. That's definitely what we want to do here. And we do have a little bit more time on the stream here, so let's start the journey of that. Now this gets into a little bit more complicated things. There is a pattern called CQRS. Those that are interested and don't know CQRS, there is a whole Microsoft. Oh, let's do Google because Bing is terrible. Let's do CQRS, and we're gonna say Microsoft Docs, and here it is. So they have a bunch of different documentation on CQRS, and they explain what's going on with it from an architecture standpoint, the solution, and how it solves problems. Now, they don't tell you how to set up your projects inside of here. It's just saying what type of things you should probably do. And I want to say that so I think the guy's name is Uncle Bob. There's this whole thing where Uncle Bob has this clean project architecture where he believed that your project should be broken down into your solution should be broken down into 4 separate projects. I think that that's okay if you're a big enterprise company, but honestly, I make the argument that is that really needed? If you're not sharing the code between those 4 projects with other projects, do you need 4 separate projects to break your code down? What I found is when you do this, you end up getting into the problem where the developer can't find where the code is. And that kind of stinks. And so I always say make the project as simple as possible and make it so that the developer can find things faster. So I'm not going to have 4 different projects like Uncle Bob. Instead, there's a YouTube channel out there. Oh, what's the guy's name now? I think it's called Code Opinions. YouTube Code Opinions. I think that's is that it? Right here it is. This guy. Yeah.
Hey everybody, it's Derek Martin from CodeOpinion.com.
Yeah, so this channel here by Code Opinion, if you're into ASP.NET, go subscribe to this channel. He will go through and explain clean architecture. He explains all the different patterns and templates. And honestly, he even has the argument that sometimes you don't need the 4 different clean architecture patterns. You can get away with 2. And so if you're looking to learn ASP.NET, my channel and what I'm streaming is never going to be the quality of this because this is what this person does full time. Okay. And because of that, he's going to do it really great. And man, I promise you, if you go watch his videos, and he does try to keep these videos a little bit short so that they're easy and chewable, you watch all these videos and you'll have the ability to write ASP.NET pretty well. And so perfect. This guy is awesome. Can't recommend his videos enough. So I don't watch all of them, but I watch quite a few of them. I'm always interested to see how other people think that things should be done. And that's how I learn. And that's everybody should be trying to learn, right? So you'll see here that Microsoft's documentation will go through and explain like a way of getting into DTOs and DAOs, data access objects and data transformation objects. We're going to get into these a little bit today. What you need to know what I'm going to show you is this option of a command. A command is basically a unit of work. That's how I kind of think of it. And then we have something called a query. The query is like requesting something. And then we have somebody that basically, so think of it like this. I would like a user profile. I'm going to query you and say, I would like a user profile. Some worker this command person, it's going to go through and say, I can go find this for you. I will go find, figure out how to get you this user profile you're looking for. I'll do all that work for you, and then I'll give you that back. And then that's pretty great, right? So that's the pattern that we would like to kind of do. And Microsoft's document goes through this in great detail. I'm going to summarize this down to say that's what I'm looking to do. Now, you can add validation in, and I totally think you should have validation in. And there's a couple NuGet packages you can do to make this super easy. So let's go through and see if we can implement CQRS very quickly. Now, boy, I could implement all this myself. But man, that just seems like a lot of work. And I've told you at the beginning of the stream, I'm a lazy developer. If there's NuGet packages that already do this, that are kind of like semi-standard in the sense that the community has agreed that they're really good, I should probably use one of those, right? And so the answer is there is one of those, and that's called MediatR. MediatR is made by a developer, and I'm not good at remembering names. I'm just going to tell you that out front. But he also wrote some of the mapping libraries for C# and ASP.NET. And so he is been known in the community for quite a while. His code's pretty solid. And so I don't remember if there's more than one NuGet package. So I'm going to cheat. I'm going to see if I have on another screen a project I could open up to look at the configuration to see whether or not I can get away with just adding the one project in and that it'll add the rest in. I actually do not remember. It's been a while. So let me see here. MediatR is what? Oh, let's see here. I don't need JWT tokens. Where's MediatR? Swashbuckle. I don't see MediatR. I know I used it in this project. Didn't that MediatR? Weird. I don't see it anywhere in there. Well, we'll fly close to the sun and just see if we can figure this out by looking here. I think this is how it's spelled. MediatR. There we are. Let's see here. Extension for AutoFac IoT to use. No, we don't want that. We want this for ASP.NET Core, I want to say. Ooh, it looks pretty old. No, I'm running into the thing where this isn't the same developer, but there's some kind of extension. Which one of these I need to use? That's the next thing. I'm trying to figure out. So some of these are not the original, the actual MediatR library. And I don't want to use something that's not the original because I just know that's going to make me run into problems. And so let's look and see if we can find a documentation on this real quick. So because, I mean, this is how it really works, right? If I want to use MediatR, I'd just look for an example of how to do it from their documentation. So I'm just going to say google.com. This is how real software developers work. MediatR. CQRS. ASP.NET 6. See if we can find an example. Here we go. Somebody maybe says, I just want to know the NuGet packages. Let's see here. He's saying extensions, Microsoft dependency injection that you need, and you need MediatR as the package. So two of them it looks like. And that should hopefully be all we need. Just looking to see if he has any other details of things that... Looks like that's the only things that he says that you need in order to do this and make this work. And here's another diagram that kind of explains this. You have your, I wouldn't say UI, this would be our controller. Then you have the query and the command. And then we'll have a repository, it's called, that goes to Couchbase and gets data from there. And let's see here. So we want those two NuGet packages. So let's go back here and say we want MediatR. And we also want Microsoft dependency injection. So those two packages. It'll take a few seconds. Of course, like I said, we can always go to View, and we can go to other windows and go to the Package Manager, or the Package Console. And if I were to bring that window up, I think it's hidden right now. Oh, looks like Visual Studio for the Mac's not letting me bring it up. If I go to other windows, Package Console. So this looks like another kind of weird defect in the beta. Oh, there it goes. That's weird. It took a couple times. if we scroll this window, I should be able to see what's going on with the packages. So you can see all packages are compatible with .NET 6. That's a good sign. That was my fear, is that we were going to get to the point where we had a package that wouldn't be compatible with .NET 6. And so that's why I didn't want to use like these third-party people that are adding packages on. If we take a look here, we can see that the MediatR extensions, Microsoft is probably using Microsoft's own ASP.NET dependency injection engine. And it looks like it is. And so that's good. That means that we have a pretty good chance for compatibility with ASP.NET 6, I think. Now, it's usually not that simple. It's not as simple as just going in. And I know that you're going to say, well, geez, man, really? Aaron, I thought you said this is really easy. Sort of. Usually you kind of have to spin MediatR up and tell MediatR some stuff. And this gets into some complications when you're doing the clean architecture pattern, to tell you the truth. And so usually there's a, boy, my memory's going blank here, but usually, okay, here. So up here where we have this build services, you have to add MediatR into what we call the pipeline. We have to add it in to the point where we tell it, hey, these are the things, this is the libraries we want to use when we build our software. And it makes it so those things are available. If you have multiple projects and try your solution, you have to tell MediatR where all those projects are, because how to explain this? All right. What ends up really happening behind the scenes is this gem-based.domain project that builds something we call a DLL, Dynamic Link Library. And then that DLL gets included in the API project when it compiles. That's what it's really doing behind the scenes. Well, MediatR, if you don't tell it about all the DLLs that you're generating when you build, it doesn't know where all the things are at. It doesn't know where all the classes that you have are at in your project. And so if you're using multiple projects with MediatR outside of these domain objects, you do usually have to register MediatR a little bit different, and you have to tell it about the other DLL files you're generating. That's another reason why I didn't want to use multiple projects with the clean architecture, is because it makes everything a little bit more muddier. And I look back and I'm saying, if there's no advantage to that, if not getting code reuse out of it, then why am I doing it? And right now in this particular project I want to build, I have no advantage to it, so I'm not going to do it. And then later on, if I do need to, kind of go through and take that code out, I'll do that. But honestly, right now today, I just don't think I need it. So I'm going to add in MediatR. So I'm going to just put a comment in here that says adding MediatR for CQRS support. Just to give somebody, if they're looking at this, to understand what we're going to do in here. So builder services, and I think that it's called add me. How you spell MediatR? Like that, I think. Let's go through and see if IntelliSense will help us here. So the window that comes up is a little bit tricky to get working, it looks like. But yes, this is what I want. I wanted to use MediatR, and I wanted to add this services in. So it looked like it added that method in, and then it's saying I need to add the assembly. And do I really need to add the assembly, though? The assembly is the DLL file, we call it. I was hoping that IntelliSense would tell me what it wants. It wants a parameter of assemblies. Here we go. See the 1 through 6? We can use the little arrows here to see other types of ways that you can do this. And so let's see what other options it has. I just don't remember having to add assembly in if everything's self-contained in this project. Let's do this. Let's do MediatR GitHub. And let's look at the actual documentation on GitHub. Install package, add package. Does he have wiki documentation that sets this? Okay, here we go. Set up the package. Yes, it has no dependencies. You need to configure 2 dependencies first. The MediatR itself. The other dependency is the factory delegate. Oh boy. Here we go. This is what we needed. So we're looking at ASP.NET. Since we're using the dependency injection engine, which we are using, it's saying we still do have to send the type of. So we have to send one thing. All right. So what this is going to do, this line of code, is typeof will give us the type of this class, and then by doing that, it can find the assembly or the DLL that gets generated by that. And the mediator can look through all the classes to find what's available. And it's going to use that for reflection. So when it tries to figure out where one of these classes is, it can try to figure that out dynamically. I'll show you that in a little bit. It's actually semi-magic what it does. It basically can figure out a query and then figure out what command maps to it. And it does that magically through the API, and that's the reason why you want to use Mediator, because it does a bunch of things for you that you don't have to write otherwise. So we still do need to give it the assembly for this. So that's not a big deal. We could do that. Now, startup doesn't exist anymore. It's only program in .NET 6. So when we looked at the directions here, they have not been updated for ASP.NET 6. In fact, we should probably contact him and let him know, or I should do that. Peter, whoever this person is that did this update, probably needs to know that in .NET 6 this wouldn't work because of the fact that the startup class no longer exists. I'll have to figure out how to do it afterward. I'll go through and maybe put a pull request against this wiki and update that document for .NET 5 versus 6. That's the friendly thing to do in the community. But for right now, we're just going to say type of, and we're going to say program. Program, not project, program. And that should fix it, according to the documentation. Now, of course, I'm missing a parenthesis, and that will probably make it a little bit happier because we have a function call, and that should work. That should add mediator support in. And hopefully, I'm just going to read a little bit more down here in the ASP.NET stuff. We shouldn't need the structure map because it should be doing that magically for us. And we're not using autofact, so we shouldn't need that. And so, yes, all we should have to do is register a handler and a request. And if we do that, the magic should happen. Yeah, so we need to register the mediator for the controller to be able to send messages through it. That's definitely something that I know that we have to do. But I'm just looking here to see if there's anything else in the documentation that maybe has changed since I've last used this to make sure I don't run into a problem. But it looks like it has not. So this is pretty basic. All right, let's rock and roll and see if we can figure this thing out. All right, I'm going to change the way that the project's structured. I don't want separation of folders by controllers. Instead, what I'd like to do is I'd like to move to something called feature development, where for everything inside my project is based on a feature. And by doing that, I can put my CQRS code. I can put my code for my repository for that. I can put my controllers, all of them in a single folder so that when I'm working on that feature, I don't have to go to find classes. I can put all that stuff in one spot, find it really easy. And if I get rid of that feature, I don't need it anymore. I just delete that folder and they're all gone. It also means that I can test, I know what to test that entire feature because all the stuff's in that folder. So that kind of gives me an idea of like what's going on with this feature. So our first feature we've been working on is something called this user profile. So really what I want to do is I want to make a new folder. So I'm going to go in, right click on my project, not my solution, my project, right click, add, and we're going to add a new folder, and we're just going to call this features. Inside the features folder, my first one I'm going to add is a new folder and call it user profile. And now what I could do is I can refactor out my controller, my user profile controller, into this folder. Now when I drag it in, I don't think it renames it. Let's see here, feature, user profile controller. If I go back and look here, it's still based on API controllers for my namespace. I do like my namespace to match my folder structure, so I'm going to change that actually. I'm going to say that this is now api.features.user profile, and that's my place to find it. Features, user profile, that seems right. I'm going to delete the folder, the controller folder here because I don't need it anymore. The route shouldn't change. Okay, just to make sure that we understand is I moved my controller into a different folder, but that shouldn't change my route. My route should still be whatever I've currently configured it as. So where you stick your controller doesn't 100% always map namespace wise. This namespace change shouldn't by theory change the way that it goes through and builds my routes. Now we're making some assumptions here. Let's go ahead and build and see what happens. See if our builder will work. And we're going to build output. Now, of course, like I said, I don't have diagnostics set up, so build output's taking a little bit here as it's building. Did change some stuff around, so let's see here. User profile namespace, but use as a type. Well, that's because that it's no. User profile is from the domain namespace. Because now the feature is the same thing here. Yeah. So we're gonna have a namespace problem because the user profile object is the same name as this folder and namespace. So how do you solve this, Aaron? Well, it's pretty simple. You put a domain in front of it because that's the name of the namespace right here. And that tells us which profile to use then. And if I tell it domain here also, it fixes the namespace conflict. And that's the answer to how to fix that. Let's go ahead and build again. And this is because I know a lot about .NET and how namespace work. It's very clear to me here that this namespace here is going to conflict with the object name down here, which is in a totally different namespace. The cool thing is, though, namespace makes this so that you can use the name more than once and just make sure you understand the fully qualified path to it and just be able to change that. So eventually we're going to figure out where it thinks weather forecast is a thing that should open up first and make sure that we fix that. Before, let's just try out our controller again and see that by moving the refactoring the code, make sure that we didn't break our already working API. Oop. I think I have a space at the beginning of it. I do. And because a GUID must be a certain type of format, it knew that and it threw a red error that said that's not a GUID. And our API is still working. So we did all that refactoring only to find out that our API didn't break. But honestly, in the world of development, that's really half the battle, right? Is making changes, small changes, making sure your code doesn't break, and going through and then making sure that everything's cool. All right. There is a way to make it easier to test this stuff, which we'll definitely get into, not in this probably video, but this stream, but probably my next stream. And so if you go to Twitch, by the way, I do have a schedule of when I'm going to be streaming. It's going to be regularly based now. So I believe we're going to go with Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. And those are going to be 3:30 to 5:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And then Saturdays, I'll be doing a stream. I want to say it's going to be 12:30 until 2:30. And so we're almost at 2 o'clock here now. So we got about another 30 minutes on this stream. And the first series of streams we're going to be doing is a gamification engine in ASP.NET. And then we will probably do some mobile stuff after we do that. And I may even switch it up where 2 streams I'm doing ASP.NET and 2 streams I'm doing mobile. And that's probably more likely what's going to happen because I don't do just APIs. I really like mobile a lot. I like playing with mobile. And if I'm going to stream, I might as well just stream some mobile stuff too. So we'll have a little bit of everything on our streams. But back to this particular application we're building, we now have the guts kind of going. But the real problem is that we still haven't gotten our point to where we can get our CQRS up and running. Sorry, blew a brain fart there. So let's see here. We've got our feature. We should probably take a look at how we can then kind of turn this into a true CQRS project. And so normally what would happen is we would have a get feature that goes through and gets it. So let's do that. Let's add a new folder. We're going to say, and this will hopefully make some sense in here. Get user profile by, well, I'm going to take the word user profile out because we already know it's user profile because the folder name is that. So I don't think we need to reuse the user profile name over again. I think that's probably a waste of typing. But we can say get by ID is our feature. And let's see, it's going to be a query. Okay. Because we are querying for that. So now we have there. What we probably want to do is we want to get into getting we need a request handler, which is going to handle it, and then we need a query object. And those are two things that for queries that we probably need to take a look at for CQRS to get it up and running. So we need to be able to send a query to it and define what that query is, and then we need to get back something. So the query is pretty easy if you think about it for a second, because the only thing that we have is technically speaking the ID, right? And we're going to then return something. So this is going to get where it gets kind of interesting. I'm trying to think here. I'm just trying to decide, do we make it super hard for us or do we make it a little bit easier for us? I don't think I want to get into DTOs yet. I think what I want to do is just get this working with our existing object and then see if it works. And then if it doesn't work, then add a DTO in. So then instead, let's just go ahead and make a new class. What we need to do is we need to make first a query, then a handler that handles whatever the query is. So I'm going to call this class request query by ID. Let's do request query. Yeah, I think we could probably do that. I'm worried about namespace collisions. That's the reason why I paused there for a sec going, is that going to cause me a namespace collision? I don't think so. And I got to think about this for a second to say, would that happen? Would we have, if we, it's, we definitely don't want to have it where we're going to run into problems here with namespace, but I don't think so. So instead, I think what we're going to do is we're going to say that this is, there's something called a iRequest object. And the iRequest is a MediatR object. And do we need generics on this? Oh, no, I should have added the references. I don't think we need generics right now on this. We need to tell it what type of thing we're returning. That's right. If I remember right on this, we would need to tell it what type of thing we're returning. So I think it's like this. We'll say user profile, if I remember right. Let's go ahead and we're going to put domain in so that we don't conflict with namespace. Let's see if it added in the namespace for us. It didn't need to add the namespace in, it looks like, because it knows Gembase API, and so it can figure out domain would be Gembase API domain user profile, which it gives this object down here. So what we do need though is we need to tell it what will be inside the query. And we're going to say, well, we know what's inside the query, right? We know that currently today somebody's sending us a route, sending us a GUID. And the GUID's coming from the route. And that's how we're trying to figure out what user to return. Okay, does that make sense? So what we're going to try to do is we're going to try to change it. So versus sending in the GUID to our signature of our controller, we're going to have it send in this instead. So how we're going to do that is we're going to say from route, because if we take a look at our controller takes the signature of the GUID in from route, and it's actually this right here. So this is what we're going to do instead of having this get by ID have all this coding here. We're going to make a request query, and we're going to tell MediatR just handle the request query and bring back the results for us. We're literally going to have MediatR do all the routing and all the work for us. This will make it so we can separate our code. It'll make our controller really thin. It puts our all of our code to find that into one spot, which then means that now we can test this. When we're testing our controllers, we just need to test whether or not MediatR router is working. When we want to test our actual talking to the database, we just test our repository. When we want to test our business logic, we just test our handler. And we basically have three ways of separating our data down then. We can separate our data access layer down to that repository and service. We can take our business logic in the handler, and then we can take our routing with the controller via the request query. That's our goal. So we know that we need it from a route. We know it's a GUID, and we know that it's ID. So that's what we're going to make here. We're going to say that we have a from route. We'll go through and do... boy, that UI is really slow. I don't think it's coming up. Try it again. There it goes. So that's something that we definitely want to tell. I'll have to tell my friends at Microsoft that it seems to be just really slow. Public GUID, and we're going to say we're going to call this ID. And we're going to make it a property. This should be all the magic we need to do here. And now what we have is we have a request query by ID instead. Now what we could do, let's close this out. And we should be able to change this line here, if I remember right, to be in the request query. So we could say user profile dot. I went too far. Request. Oh, we need to put the namespace in first. User profile dot request. Okay. That was. That doesn't seem right. I thought we put the word request in it. It is that. User profile. Oh, it is. Nope, that was right. Get by ID. Request. So do we really need the by ID though? Because we're saying it here. I think we could just simply rename this class to be that instead. And we'll say request query. We do have a bug because the ID is here, but we're going to take all this code out in a second. I think we want to just rename this to say that it's request query. Refactor. Is the refactor command working in here? Let's see. Open with rename. We're about to find out if the refactoring works inside of Visual Studio for Mac. It does not, because I renamed the file and I did not do that here. So let's go here and see if we refactor if it works. Rename. We want it to just be request query. Let's see if it fixed it in our controller now. It did. Okay. So we're going to say get by ID query and request query. And it's smart enough to know that that lives in the user profile features because the controller is in the same folder. So that's why we put the controller in here so that all the namespacing magic starts to work. So technically speaking, we don't want this part though. That's the part that's not working because what we want to do instead is we want to be able to say MediatR handle this. So normally how this would work is you just say we need to bring in the MediatR object to our injection of our controller next. So we currently do that with logging, but we need to bring MediatR in. So we'll need to make a reference to it too. So it's going to minimize this out. Let's make a reference to the MediatR person that goes through and does all the really hard work on this. So we're going to say private read only MediatR, I think is what it's called. MediatR, it is. And we're just going to call this the MediatR, right? We can spell it with OR, I guess. Make sure it's spelled right. MediatR. All right, so then in here, what we need to do, I'm going to make an, oh, I don't have the VI plugin. Oh no, this is terrible. Oh man, I just now realized I don't have VI commands. I've been typing for 35 minutes and not realizing that. MediatR, we'll call this mediator, and then we'll say here, MediatR equals wow, that's weird. Like IntelliSense is not working for some reason. Notice that? Like if I type in med, why isn't it completing it for me? MediatR equals med. Huh. It's like my IntelliSense stopped working. Well, that's annoying as heck because the IntelliSense is one of the reasons we use the IDE, right? So it saves us from typing. Let's change all this code out now. So we're going to just say, hey, we're going to copy this code. Start out with. Actually, we can recreate it. It's nothing special here. We're going to say try catch now. We're going to get some realistic code here. Catch. We'll say the exception. EX. Oh, let's see here. We have a logger. So let's tell logger to log the error. And we'll say ex.message. And I have exception spelt wrong. And then what we're going to do is we're going to return status code. Let's say status codes dot. That's weird. Why is this not coming up? Does it just want to int, really? We'll give it a 500 error for right now. If this breaks for some reason... Wait, what? Why can't we return a status code? Oh. Because we're telling it specifically what we want. We're going to do this. We're going to say this is a I action result instead. And by doing that, we can send generic stuff back. And this should now work. And the only difference now is that we need a path to return something else. So I action result just basically says, hey, something's going to return back, and this interface just returns a serialized thing back and handles it. It's a more generic way of doing things versus the very specific way that we had programmed before. So let's see here. We want to... I'm just looking here to see. We forgot the from route here because it should be from the route. Make sure that we didn't forget that. Otherwise, that's going to break our API. And then the only thing difference now, I do believe here, is it's still mad that we aren't doing... we need to write some code to give it something to return. So we'll say var response equals await the mediator dot send, and we'll send in our request query. And then whatever that returns, we don't know what the heck it is, but we don't care as long as it doesn't break. We'll say this dot okay, and then we'll send the response. Holy crap, that looks a lot different, right? Oh, semicolon here. So used to Kotlin. No semicolons in Kotlin. All right, this looks a lot cleaner. Why is this mad now? Let's do this. Let's break this down so we can see the method name at least. And I think that looks a little bit cleaner. All right. Let's start for a second here and break this down, what we just did. It looks like it's a lot. It really is. Actually, I think we can put from route up here too, so that's a little bit more readable. I got to get VI plugin installed on this editor, though. This is driving me nuts. All right. What we're saying is that we're going to make a request query instead, and this is going to be a pattern we're going to follow from now on. Is that we're going to use Mediator for a solution, and in here we're going to have a request query and a request handler that handles the query. The query then will take in whatever the user's sending us, and in our example here, we're just getting an ID from them. It's going to come from the route, okay? And we're going to say we have no idea how to handle this. That's not our job. The controller's job is just to send somebody else to handle this. And Mediator is going to find the person to handle this query and get some response for it, and then go through and return that response back. This greatly simplifies our controller if you think about it, right? We're down to the point where technically speaking, this is like 2 lines of code. And, you know, even our errors are only 2 lines. We can get this a little bit more complicated if we knew the user could have like the authentication's wrong. We could throw back a special exception to tell the user, hey, you're not authenticated. And that would tell whoever's calling us, oh, we got to go re-authenticate the user or something like that, right? That opens us up in this design to be able to send those kind of custom exceptions out. And so I think this is a little bit cleaner of a design. This is also going to make unit testing this controller super easy because this is pretty easy to fake out. Awesome. So we got our very first mediator-based controller set up. We've got a query, but we need somebody to do the work, right? Because what is this doing? We know we got a query, but how do we get the work back from the mediator? How do we even tell mediator who's the person to do the work? Well, that's where the handler comes in, okay? So let's pin this back out and take a look here. We need a request handler. We're going to make a new quest called request handler. This is going to handle our request. Now, this does take a couple of libraries, and I might have to... I think we have that... do we have the... do I have the source code up here? Or the example up here? I think I can probably do this from memory, but I don't have the GitHub repo open anymore. We'll see if I can do it from memory. If not, we'll look up some APIs. But I'm pretty sure what we end up doing is a request handler is going to take a couple things in. It takes in the name of the query and then what it's going to return, if I remember right. So let's take a look at the interface for, I want to say, iRequest handler. It is, and so let's see here. There it is, and I think what it does is it takes in the request. And the request would be our query. So this would be request query. And then I want to say all we have to do is go to quick refactoring and implement interface, and it should tell us there's our query request, our cancellation token, and how to answer this. Why is this saying this is wrong? No, that should be right. I'm pretty sure that's right, because request query inherits from my request, and the request handler then save. Oh, I accidentally closed it. That's not what I wanted to do. Boy, this UI is a little confusing. So it's saying here, the gens feature request query cannot be used by a parameter IoT request, the generic type of request. It has no interface from. Oh, but no, this iRequest handler should take an iQuery, right? Right? Oh, let me look at another example I have of this. Maybe I have some code that does this already. I can look at and see. So where is a am I missing the the response? So the response would be a user profile. That's what I'm missing here. That, and this would have to be domain user profile. And then this would be domain user profile. That's where I'm messing up. What's the red squiggly complaining about now? I don't think it's complaining about anything. I think the editor has not had time to adjust. Yep. Let's put this here so we can see it. All right, so what are we saying? We're telling the handler that it's going to take in a type of request query that we have there, right? That makes sense. Here's our request query, and it implements this iRequest. That's an interface. So that will definitely tell us this is a request. A handler needs one of these type of requests to tell mediator, I'm registering myself to do this person's query. I can answer this query. So that's what our request handler is doing here, right? It's saying first, if you find somebody that's requesting this type of query, I know how to answer it. And then it's going to say, when I do answer it, I'm going to give back one of these type of objects. And then all we have to do is this interface defines a single contract method called handle. And this is where we have our code that says, I'm going to take the request in and I'm going to give you back an answer. So now what we could do is we can make this also async, right? Because that way we can wait this. And then this is where we can add in our code that says task.run for right now. I want to say, actually, I don't even need to do that. I can do, I think I can do task.complete. So the fact that the IntelliSense is not working right now is a little frustrating, to tell you the truth. I think there's a method called completed task, but I don't remember if that's the name of it or not. We'll just do what I do now. Run. I'll look up that syntax in a second, or restart this editor to see whether or not the IntelliSense starts working again. And I can just await this. Wait. That will solve the requirement of this, and then I just need to return return new user profile. And we're going to say that it is first name equals on last. Oh, because I'm doing lazy, not a constructor. I need this instead of this to use the Kotlin. Last name. I need to tell this domain. That's what that is. Email equals john.galloway@microsoft.com. And then the last thing is our ID. Our ID, user profile ID, is going to equal the request.id. And we'll make that toString, because that's what we're returning. Now, this is probably wrong, and we'll fix this next, because technically speaking, what we should be storing in the database is a string, but what we should be returning is a GUID probably. We'll take a look at that. We may want to do like a DTO at this point in time. We're also missing some fields like created and modified and those kind of things that we can add in and subtract in via a DTO. In the database, we probably want to track anytime a user profile is created and who created it and modified it, so that we can have security logging. But when we send that back to the client, we probably want to drop those fields. So that's what data transformation or data access objects can do for us. So this should work, though. So let's review everything we just did here, because this is a lot for a Saturday. What we did was we added this new framework called MediatR in. And we're taking a look at doing CQRS, which is a pattern of making our controller super thin by saying we're going to bunch our features together into units of work. We're going to have something, when we query, we have something called a request query. And then we have something called a request handler. The handler handles the query, does some work, and sends the results back. So what we've done is we've injected into our constructor. Well, first, we went into, just make sure we understand this, inside of our program. Okay, we went through and added MediatR in. We said, MediatR, add yourself in. MediatR now knows it's going to go in and it's going to look for any objects that are of the I request and also the I handler. Right here, request handler. And it's going to keep track of the request query to the handler mapping. So it knows, oh, when I see a query come in, right here, if somebody sends me one of these queries, I'll go find the handler and run that code and then return back whatever the handler does back. That's what CQRS and that's what MediatR is doing for us. So we went and injected MediatR in. Dependency injection is built into .NET as long as you add in it in your program. So we don't have to worry about this. The iMediator should figure itself out, and that does it because of the fact that we added the when we added this in right here, it should add it in the interface and all the stuff into the dependency injector so that it knows how to make one of those. And inside of our controller now, we're just basically saying, let's use this MediatR. We're going to go through and we're going to send it a request, this request here, and then what we'd like some work to be done, and then we're going to send that response back to the browser. Magic sauce, this should all just work. So let's go ahead and try to run this and see if it works. And I think then that's maybe a good point where we end the stream today, because we've done a lot. I wanted to get some database stuff done with the repository, but I think we'll probably have to do that on Monday because it's getting to the point where I only have like 10 minutes left on the stream. Yeah, Nick, yeah, there's definitely... I'm going to be doing some Swift stuff. I've already know what I'm writing, actually, and so it's going to be really interesting. The Swift stream, I'm going to take a Jetpack Compose app I wrote with Kotlin and Jetpack Compose, and I'm going to rewrite it in Swift UI. And we're actually going to the app already works in Jetpack Compose, and so one of the things that's really interesting that I want to do, I want to compare Jetpack Compose to Swift UI. I want to show the differences between it. So one, if you're a Swift developer, there's some Swift UI stuff there. But if you are a Swift UI developer and you're thinking that you want to go multi-platform, I want to show you just how easy it is and how the syntax is so similar that you can learn Kotlin very quickly and you can use your same skills, the same concepts that you're using in Swift UI over in Jetpack Compose. So I think that's a really interesting concept and idea to do. So we're definitely going to be doing a bunch of that. I'm going to refresh my Swagger link here. I still haven't fixed my configuration where it thinks weather forecast is the thing that should come up, which is hilarious. let's go ahead and test this thing out now, and this should just work. Let's go in and do my GUID here, try this out, and through the magic of the mediators, this should all just work. So we okay, so this is interesting. It doesn't work. We got a document not found, which means that the mediator, for some reason, is not able to route through the request to find it. What would I do in this kind of world where hey, this isn't working? So let's find out if we can figure out where the error is. And so that's where we debug, right? So let's take a look here. So let's put a breakpoint in here. If we can. I'm not sure if this is allowing me to put breakpoints in. Man, this is a bummer. I'm debugging right now. Do I have to close the debugger to put a breakpoint in? Oh, there it goes. It's way over here instead of over there. That's interesting. Maybe I'm thinking of literally Android Studio and Xcode where you click over next to the number. It's been a while. Let's try to debug again and see if we can figure out what's going on here. See whether or not, because we have the request here. We're sending the request in. The handler has it. The handler should know about it. It should be able to do that. Let's close these two windows. Go back here. We're going to execute again. And what should happen is our IDE should hopefully break. Where is our breakpoint? Now this is interesting. So it didn't get here. Now that tells me that it didn't even make it to our method. Right? I mean, there's a good chance it's not doing that. So that may be something totally different. Let's do this here. Let's do it before the response gets even calculated. See whether or not it's saying that it can't find this. Is that the question? What's going on here? Go back to here. I have a feeling that this is a configuration that I have wrong. So yeah, it's saying that it's not finding the API. Let's refresh this. Maybe the API changed. Let's just try this one more time by refreshing to see whether or not Swagger UI should be generating the based on the controller, so it should know of the new API. Let's see here. We're still getting it, and the weird thing is my breakpoint's not firing. So let's look here and see if we could see the output to see what we have going on here. So we're saying here, we're listening. We are throwing an exception here. We have some WebSocket stuff there, but I don't think any of that is the actual error that we're getting. So we're saying document not found. Error not found in 4.4. So the 4.4 is saying that it can't find this path. When it runs the API, it just can't find it. So that's telling me that this particular API is not showing up for some reason. So when we change the signature out, that's, I have a feeling, what broke it. This signature right here. When we change get by ID, we're telling it to be a GUID here, but technically speaking, we're taking it in, but that should map over to a GUID. That should work, right? There's no doubt that that's what's breaking it, is that the request query thinks it should be getting an ID. So something as simple as this, where the ID is lower and it should be capitalized, because in the request query, it's ID here. Let's try stopping and see if that happens, if that's the fix. We definitely know that it's not getting to this method for some reason, because of the fact that the breakpoint here is not firing. We should be getting at least to our try catch, and we should be if the breakpoints are working, it should at least get us there. But Swagger is generating the API documentation here through the generator, so it makes it sound like it's okay. Let's see what happens now. There it is. So the entire time, I had a upper versus lowercase ID there, and it couldn't match it because when it goes to look for ID in the query, the property name is capital case instead of lowercase. So we should get a response back. I'm going to actually take this breakpoint out and just tell it to continue. Where is our debugger here? Ooh. Does this now continue? It does. Let's go back to our browser and see what happens. So that's a UI change. And there's our John Galloway. So then we did it. So the only error I had was a typo where in the property that we're saying in the HTTP GET that we're taking in a ID, the query must match that. Whatever we're saying we're getting in from the route, the type and the name must match inside of this object. And I had lowercase ID because originally we were just passing in the signature here, and I changed it to a public property inside of this object. And when I did that, I changed it to ID. And so that's the reason why it was breaking. Something very simple to fix, small typo. And with that, we now have a little bit better of a controller here. If we think about it, we've done a lot today in the stream. One, we moved all of our controllers over to a features, so we could have multiple controllers, and we took all of our features and said, we're going to break these down into folders where, and we're going to use MediatR to make routing work. And this is, in Swift, there's something called Combine. This is very similar. MediatR works in many ways kind of similar to that. These are similar concepts. And in computer science, if we think about it right, a lot of times companies will make frameworks that almost do the same thing from a computer science standpoint, but then name it something fancy. So CQRS, and you look at Combine, not 100% the same, but very similar. The same thing with like MVVM, which is this framework Microsoft came out, and it uses view models. And you notice that both in Android and in Swift now we have view models. Now we have other patterns that use those view models, but people are using the similar concepts to build stuff, and that's what you're going to find. The secret, though, is to learn the pattern and then learn what it does from a computer science standpoint, so that when you go to these new platforms and you're learning, you know the computer science of it. So now you're just trying to figure out the syntax. And that's what I did. I understand the behind the scenes of how CQRS works. I understand what it's doing, how it's mapping these two things together. So then all I have to remember is the syntax, which I always don't remember, but I remember the concept enough where I can go on the internet, go onto GitHub, go look at some sample code that will tell me the syntax that I'm missing. But the theory is to understand the concept, because as long as you understand the concept, you can survive a interview. When they ask you the concept, you could do that. And by theory, nobody should ever have to remember like the exact syntax to anything, because we have the internet, and you're never going to be working on a job where you don't have the documentation. I mean, even back in the 90s when I first started coding, we had a CD. Then the CD, for Microsoft, for example, had all the documentation on it. So anytime I wanted to go look, this is before they had like websites of documentation, I'd pop this MSDN CD into my computer, and it had all the documentation for Microsoft's frameworks. And Intel used to send one out, and Sun, when I first started my career, I was writing in C++. They had a CD, and you could pop it into your Solaris computer, and you could read all the documentation for the language and the compiler and stuff. And so by doing that, I always had documentation. So anytime somebody asked me a silly interview question like, what's the syntax for this? I'd be like, well, I mean, that's in the documentation. If you want to know the concept, I can absolutely tell you that. But if you're looking for like every method off of a certain class, I mean, I don't memorize those. I know that the concepts are, and I can probably find it if I hit the period button with the IntelliSense, and I have a good idea what the name is, but I don't remember the exact name of every method, and I don't think any developer should. Learn concepts, and when you learn concepts, you can transpose those concepts to multiple languages, multiple platforms, and be successful. I guess that's what I'm getting at. Folks, those of you that watched and hung out with me, thank you very much today. It's about 2:30, so the stream I'm going to end today here. We will be doing this quite often. Like I said, the schedule is up now. I will be not in my studio on Monday. I'm going to be working remote from my in-laws' house, which is about 5 hours away. But I still will have my camera and my mic and stuff with me, so I should be streaming. I'll post on Twitter if I'm not, but they have high-speed internet. There's no reason why we can't hang out for a couple hours and do some coding. In the next stream, we're going to make this user profile, be able to add one, be able to delete one, be able to get a list of those user profiles, and then obviously return this one, but we're going to get it from a database instead. And then we'll start taking a look at what gamification is. And gamification is a concept of like If you've got a mobile game, a lot of times the mobile games have a bunch of different currencies in those, and you're trying to, if you're playing like role-playing games, you're trying to track like your quests, and you get rewards for those quests. Well, it turns out that's all gamification. But the funny part is gamification's beyond just video games and mobile games and stuff like that. It literally is about trying to reward people for doing things and then give them behavior modifiers, rewards, so that they continue doing the things you want them to do. Examples is like Stack Overflow. In Stack Overflow, there's a currency system, and every single time you answer a question, you can get awards, achievements, they call it. That's gamification. If you go to the Microsoft Learn website and you watch a bunch of learning videos, they basically give you so much XP, and then you gain levels. And if somebody were to go look, they can see how many levels you are, and that tells them how much you've been using the website. Google's training website does the same thing for Android. If you sign in, you get achievements for watching certain videos and stuff. These are all gamification concepts. And so what I want to do is build a gamification API that would allow us to kind of reuse this in any kind of project I want. I've already done this one time before, just kind of redoing it now in ASP.NET. And I may eventually actually do this in Kotlin also, on Java, and maybe even in Python or Node.js, just for the fun of it. It's always fun to look at other platforms and how you build things. So, again, thanks everybody for hanging out with me today on the stream, and I look forward to seeing you guys on Monday, and I will send some messages out. So take care, stay safe, and be kind to one another. We're all developers. We're all in this together. So if you have any questions, hit me up on the Twitters. I'm more than happy to try to help you out however I can.